Well, we're so fortunate to have Sandy Monroe with us right now. We have some questions for you, Sandy. We're talking about China coming, and this kind of reminds me of the 80s with Japan. I remember all of a sudden all these Japanese models were on the market. A lot of Americans were like, what is Nissan? What is Honda? They seem like joke cars, and yet they took over the market. Do you remember back in the 80s, like what was the car that was most impactful to you, the brand that was most impactful as the Japanese car market started to ramp up here in America?
I remember everything crystal clear because I was your age then. The Japanese invasion happened really quickly, much faster than anybody could possibly imagine. And I was working at Ford at that time. Ford had a real miserable time trying to put out a small car that wouldn't fall apart, you know, on your way to the drugstore. These vehicles were absolutely pure crap. They had taken the MBA philosophy, if you like, to the max. And what they were doing was anything that got out the door was good to sell. And profit, well, we're going to make our profit on spare parts. I was working as a tool maker, pulled into the parking lot at Valiant Machine Tool, and a guy pulled in next to me. And I looked at it and I said, what in the world is that? He says, I just bought it, and it was like my car, let's say, was X. This Toyota was probably 1/10 X. And I said, how do they make it so cheap? And he says, I don't know, but I bought it, and blah, blah, it works good, and yak, yak, yak. And I looked around, and I said, do you mind if I look underneath? And I looked underneath, and it had a chain drive. This was one of the very first Toyotas that came across. It was a chain drive. I said, you're an idiot. This thing will never last. Some of the car companies had already entered the market, but under motorcycle names. So, and you meet the nicest people on a Honda, you know, Solo Suzuki. There was a ton of different products that they brought into the market. First thing they did was gobble up the motorcycle market, which was dominated by the English. And that disappeared in it seemed like seconds, but it was probably something like a few years. And then their cars started showing up. Now I was like 2 or 3 years, and now I was at Ford. And I'm telling you what, they devastated. They mopped the floor with the American car companies. At that time, in that era, 55% of the market belonged to General Motors alone. 25% was Ford, and Chrysler had 12 or 15%, something like that. Now it's like ridiculously small. I think General Motors is like 18%, something like that. Amazing. And that all happened within 5 or 6 years. Between the oil embargo and the fact that gasoline was hugely expensive, it went from like a quarter a gallon to $2. People were trying to get out of their big fat cars faster than you could believe. And nobody wanted to drive a pickup truck, nobody. So this was a cultural and economic change that happened, and we're in exactly the same situation now. Here we are again, 35 years later, and it's in exactly the same situation.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, it seems so similar that now EVs are more efficient than gas cars, so they save you money. And the quality, a lot of people kind of laugh at Chinese brands, kind of like they laughed at Japanese brands when they first came. So do you think this is kind of a repeat?
Oh, I'm positive. Like, I've been working with the Chinese for the last 5 years. So 3 months of the year, I was in China working on the design of new cars. So they built a tremendous number of vehicles. So in 2018, 27 million cars were made in China. And this year, they're expecting somewhere around 24 million. If we look at the United States, we sell about 17 million in 2018. In 2021, we'll be lucky to do 14, maybe 15 million. Remember, these guys have been making cars at a ferocious rate. They know what a good car has to look like in order to make a sale. Now what they've done is they don't want to have the old American masters. So a lot of these cars, like if you look at the car sales in China, almost all of the big car companies like Cadillac or whatever, they're all represented in that 24 or 25 million vehicles. They're all big. They're at the top of the line. So you've got GM and Volkswagen and all of the big names all sitting up there at the top. Well, now they're making their own cars. And all these big car companies that have been building basically American cars, well, we're going to build our own Chinese cars, and they're going to be only electric because they have no desire to get into the ICE world. What happens when these start hitting California? I mean, California's going to see it first. It's just going to be the same as Japan. And quite frankly, California doesn't have allegiance to a car company. It's not like Detroit. But a lot of people have a lot of different ethnicities in California. When I said that the crossover point was going to be 2028 for ICE to EV, I wasn't kidding. And this is what I've got in the back of my mind. A lot of those cars are going to be Chinese. And they are going to come in wave after wave after wave after wave. And the guys here cannot say no. If the U.S. government says no, then China will nationalize all of the plants that all the foreigners are building at in China, and they'll instantly go bankrupt because most of their profit now is coming from the China market, not from the U.S. market. So I see a tidal wave of problems coming that obviously the rest of the world doesn't see. I don't know how they could miss this. Maybe it's just because I'm old, but I'm telling you, there's a storm tsunami that's coming that is going to make the Japanese, and people will forget when the Japanese came after this.
So let me just ask. So, Chinese car manufacturers right now are focusing on EVs. They're making pretty decent EVs. But what about safety? I mean, like, people really care about safety, and we think, cars made in China, we're used to the stuff that you buy at Walmart made from China. We're not built to last, and it'll kill you if you get in an accident. Do you think that's going to be true?
No, it can't be true because they have to go through all the testing and whatnot, testing and validation that basically the Department of Transportation puts out. So NHTSA, the insurance companies will crash those cars. Everybody is going to, and then we've got consumers reports and everything. Remember, shortly after Toyota came in, they went to the top of consumers reports. J.D. Powers gave them all kinds of 5-star ratings and whatnot. They're going to come in as a really well-built car, and they'll be electric. They're not going to bring in any gas vehicles, none. So that means that the EPA is totally out of business.
Now, you've worked in China at factories, like you said, for months and months at a time. You've seen the inside of these factories. What are they doing differently than American companies are doing? Because, I mean, GM, they've got the Ultium battery platform. They're fully embracing EVs, they say. So why aren't American car companies going to be able to compete?
Okay, well, I don't want to get into chemistries and big decisions that GM and Ford are making, but I can tell you right now that battery technology is changing at a pretty rapid clip. And they've decided to standardize on a battery that I think is right now obsolete, let alone in the 5 years it's going to take them to put the battery plant up. The testing and validation that needs to happen is significant.